Hey, what's up everyone? I'm Kaylee and these are my books. Welcome back to my channel. So today I have my June wrap up, which also happens to be my WHATEVERTHON wrap up. I did participate in WHATEVERTHON, which is a readathon, super popular. You read whatever you want, you get points for your team. There were bingo cards. It was a lot of fun. It was my first time participating. I was on Team Beach Readers, and due to this readathon, I was inspired to have my best reading month ever. I read, drumroll, 31 books. 31 books. That's like over a book a day. That's crazy. To be fair, some of these books were a bit short because I got into some novella series, which I'll talk about in a bit, but 31 books is still amazing for me. Now, of these 31 books, I had 2 DNFs, which isn't terrible, and the formats I read were actually pretty evenly split. I had 11 physical books, 8 audiobooks, and 12 ebooks. Now, because I read 31 books, there is no time for me to give reviews for all 31 of these books. That would be crazy. This video would be super long. No one wants to watch that. So instead, I'm just going to list the books that I've read, say what my rating was, and I'll kind of give shout outs to the ones that were my favorites for this month or the ones that I had some things to say. And if you have any other questions about the books I've read, feel free to leave a question in the comments and I can give you a more detailed review. But on to the books I read. The first book I read was Fae Fever, which is book 3 in the Fever series by Karen Marie Moning. I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name. But I gave this book 5 stars. It was awesome. I was in the middle of reading the Fever series. I had read the first 2 books last month, and you'll see, spoiler alert, the rest of this month I did finish up the next 2 books as well, so books 4 and 5, and I gave all of those books 5 stars. Now, after book 5, the Fever series kind of moves on to doing a new thing, and I wasn't so interested in that new thing, so I think for me, the Fever series is completed now that I've read the first 5 books. Then I had been attempting to read House of Leaves. That is a book I DNF'd, so I didn't give it a rating. The House of Leaves is a book a lot of people probably heard about at this point. It's very interesting format. There's kind of documents that you're looking through. It's a book within a movie. It's very complicated, and it just felt like homework to read for me. It was a pseudo-academic document, and it wasn't fun for me to read, so I DNF'd after about 300 pages, which felt bad, but it felt better than continuing to read. Then Reckless Girls by Rachel Hawkins, I gave 5 stars. It was a super fun summer thriller, highly recommend. I read Covet by Tracy Wolff. I gave this book 2 stars. It is part of that YA paranormal series. This was still when I wasn't sure if I was into YA or not. Turns out I'm not. Didn't really like it. Very tropey. Could be fun though if you're into those tropes. I next read on Kindle Unlimited Still Beating and Lotus, both by Jennifer Hartman. These are standalone novels but set in the same universe, and I read Lotus for a book club that I'm in. It's Riley's Patreon. I'll link her channel below. Most people have probably seen her. She's amazing, one of my favorite booktubers, and she has a Patreon book club, and her Patreon book club for this month was Lotus, and I wanted to read Still Beating first, that way I could have all the context for Lotus. You don't have to read Still Beating, but I wanted to. Now, these are dark romance stories. They kind of combine kidnapping with romance, and Still Beating is much darker than Lotus is, in my opinion. I ended up giving Still Beating 4 stars and Lotus 3 stars. Lotus, I was a bit bored. I felt like it could be 100 pages shorter, and Still Beating also felt like maybe it could be about 50 pages shorter. So I enjoyed both. Both felt like very unique romances to me, but if you're choosing between one or the other, if you want something that's a bit lighter, go with Lotus. If you want something heavier, go with Still Beating, but definitely check trigger warnings. I read A Curious Beginning by Deanna Raybourn. I gave it 3 stars. It was very meh. Won't be continuing on in the series. I listened to Queen of Tiles by Hannah Alkoff, and I gave this book 2 stars. It was a bit boring to me, but very unique. Would recommend if you're looking for a YA mystery centering around a setting you haven't encountered before, because this is centered around a Scrabble tournament. Then I read my favorite book of the month, probably going to be my favorite book of the year, The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. Incredible, amazing. best fantasy ever. It was so good. It had the school setting, it had the found family, it had the very dark happenings going on. It was clever, it was lighthearted at moments, and it had everything I wanted. And notice after I said lighthearted, I say at moments. This is a very, very dark fantasy for the most part. But I absolutely loved it. And if you haven't read The Poppy War yet, that's the #1 book you should pick up based off of this video. This month I also gave a couple other YA fantasies a try, including Gilded by Marissa Meyer, The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea, and All of Us Villains. All of these books were very 3 stars, just kind of to me. They were fine. They didn't do anything special. I was kind of bored at some points, kind of into other points. If you like YA fantasy, go ahead and give these a try, but if you're kind of so-so, skip them. I read Velvet Was the Night by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and Silvia Moreno Garcia is such an amazing author in my opinion. I love all of her books that I've read so far, except for this one. This one I gave 2 stars. It just didn't have enough payoff for what I was looking for. It's very slow, which is meant to be slow. You should know that going in. It's a slow kind of crime noir story. Very interesting politics happening. The characters were very complex, but it just wasn't a story for me. I was hoping for some climax at the end to make this slow lead up worth it, and the climax just never really happened, and it left me unsatisfied at the end, hence the 2 stars. Would recommend to some people, but it wasn't a story for me. I read The Night Shift by Alex Finlay. I gave it 4 stars, a very enjoyable thriller centering around some mass murders happening in the past and happening again in the current timeline. Next, I read Jade City by Fonda Lee. This book was ultimately a bit disappointing for me. I gave it 3 stars. Don't come for me. I know it has a huge fan base. I really tried, but it just left me a bit bored. I didn't really care about the story. The stakes weren't high enough for me. The characters were interesting. The magic system was interesting, but the plot left a lot to be desired from me. Next, I read The Book of Cold Cases by Simone St. James. Now, I love this author. I have read 2 of her other books, and both of those books were either 4 or 5 stars. This book was a 5-star for me. A lot of people are not liking this book, so go in with caution. But I really enjoyed this story. It's about true crime. It was about an old cold case. It was about ghosts helping out, sometimes not helping out, and it was a lot of fun. I had a good time with this book. Next, I read The Children on the Hill by Jennifer McMahon, and I've read The Drowning Kind by her, The Invited, and The Winter People. I find her stories to be really interesting because she's considered a horror author, but I never get many horror vibes from her, and this held true for The Children on the Hill. I suppose it's more of a suspense drama type of story, so I'm just warning you, don't go into this book thinking it's going to be incredibly scary. Now, with that said, I gave this book 5 stars. I had a great time with it. The themes throughout this book of what's the line between monster and human were really interesting to read about, and the characters were dynamic. I loved all of the point of views, which usually when you have multiple point of views, there's always one you don't like, but I loved every single point of view in this book, and this is another favorite of the month for me. I read Credence by Penelope Douglas. I gave this book 4 stars, but the premise is way out there, okay? I'm just being upfront. It's a weird romance, not really romance book. So basically this girl, she's 17, about to turn 18, which immediately red flags in a romance book, right? Someone who's about to turn 18, you're like, aye. And she moves in with her step uncle and his sons into an isolated winter cabin in Colorado, and listen, she hooks up with all of them. I know they're kind of her family. I know there's a big age gap there. It's weird, but at the end, it was kind of sweet because she just really needed people to love her, you know? She found 3 of them. Do I wish that she didn't find like a 40-something-year-old man when she just turned 18? Yes. Do I wish she wasn't having relations with all 3 of them in one summer? Yes. And do I wish that they weren't kind of family? Yes. But I still liked it, weirdly enough. So go into this book with caution, but if you want to read a romance story that you can't predict what's coming next, you should read this one. So my second DNF of the month and my last DNF of the month was The City of Dusk by Tara Sim. This is an adult fantasy book that just didn't work for me. Fell flat, didn't care about the characters, didn't care about the plot, didn't care about anything, so I just stopped reading it. I read Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade and loved it so much. This book is one of my favorites of the month for sure. Highly recommend. There's a lot of fandom focus in here. There's a lot of positive representation in here for fatness, for mental health, and a great representation of how to have healthy boundaries with family members. And I gave Spoiler Alert 5 stars. Next I read Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell, and this book fell a bit flat for me, 3 stars. It was fine, but nothing special. I read the entirety of the Mind F series. That's 5 books. They're all range in about 100 to 200 pages per book. And this is a romance between a female serial killer and a male FBI agent. I had a lot of fun with this book. It was super unpredictable. Checked trigger warnings for sure before going into this book, but it was a dark romance unlike any I've read before. And I gave this series as a whole 4 stars. I read The Ravenous Dead by Darcy Coates and gave this 4 stars. Super fun ghost story. I read The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang, second book in the Poppy War series. Gave this book 5 stars. Really loved it, but Poppy War is still the superior book in my opinion. But both 5-star books. And lastly, I read Guild by Raven Kennedy, first book in the Plated Prisoner series. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars, though I do hope in future books there's a little bit less random girl hate in there and more female friendship. Alright, so that was my rapid fire TBR, giving some super quick reviews. As always, if you have any other questions about these books, you can drop a comment below. But other than that, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Bye.